former President Jacob Zuma, the first president to be incarcerated in democratic South Africa, has now been granted medical parole. We'll find out exactly what it takes for an inmate to qualify for medical parole. We'll also get you further reaction from different voices regarding this latest development. We know he's been receiving treatment in hospital after having been imprisoned a couple of months ago. So it's our developing story for tonight. We'll of course round up all the other news that has unfolded and get you ready for a brand new week. In fact, let's kick it off here tonight. Former President Jacob Zuma being granted medical parole, but he remains in hospital. The Correctional Services Department says former President Zuma's medical parole was granted within the prescripts of the law. The department has confirmed that Zuma remains under medical care in hospital, but won't reveal if his illness is terminal. The former president was first taken to hospital for observation, with his legal team later revealing that he was unfit to appear in court for his corruption trial. Well, the former president's foundation has welcomed this latest development.
It just shows that there is some humaneness in the system. But on the other hand, I think it also indicates the state of the precariousness state of President Zuma's health, that in fact this decision has been taken because this decision is a product of two teams of doctors, the military hospital doctors and the correctional services doctors. So indeed, even this second opinion that people have been on about has actually has been a result. This decision has been a result of two teams of doctors that have come to a conclusion that he qualifies for medical parole.
Well, to unpack this further, we're joined by Advocate Romeo Ntambeleni. Advocate Ntambeleni, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. So, quite a surprise to hear the news of the president being granted medical parole. We hadn't been told anything about him having applied for medical parole at all. Is this usual?
Yeah, good evening, Kathy, and good evening to the viewers and listeners. I'm not surprised, but by what has transpired relating to the former president, Jacob Zuma, given the circumstances surrounding his medical situation, that he was accommodated, as you have correctly said, in a hospital facility. So I'm completely not surprised, and I believe that the processes that were being engaged with were processes that the public was not actually informed about. Hence, the news sounds surprising.
I mean, is it in a case like this incumbent on even the Correctional Services Department to have at least informed the public about the fact that this is what is being considered?
No, I don't think so. The Constitution guarantees him, the right to privacy. So I believe that everything was just being done, in the background, and that's why hence you are receiving the news as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. But looking at what was transpiring, I'm not actually surprised with the result of what has actually happened today, because it was more or less going to culminate to what is happening today.
Let's talk about the processes that are followed in, in one applying for medical parole, but also what it takes, what is the criteria that is used to determine if an individual is eligible for this kind of parole?
We follow the provisions of the Correctional Services Act, and the Correctional Services Act of 1998 is the one that prescribes how the arrested persons can be released on parole. So the department has indicated that the provisions of Section 75(7)(a), read with Section 52, were followed, when considering the release on medical parole of the former president. But given the nature of the matter, Kathy, and how the public had interest in the matter, I think that is why it was done hush-hush, and the processes of applications are not normally the processes of the applications that we will ordinarily know. That takes a long process. And let's not forget that, Kathy, we are dealing with a former president. and we have seen also in the kind of proceedings that were happening in court that there were certain things that were not in the norm in terms of even legal proceedings when he was in court. So that's why, we are receiving news in this manner that we're actually receiving. But looking at his advanced age and looking at his condition and him being in and out of hospital, and also the issue of his medical reports being debated in public, hence I'm saying that, Kathy, I'm not really surprised. We don't want to face a situation like Egypt, where you saw Mohamed Morsi being pushed in a bed, to attend a trial. So South Africa, the human rights actually prevail based on the human rights, based on the constitution, and I believe this is what is transpiring now.
Advocate Ntambeleni, there'll be big questions about that medical report which you are speaking of, because as you've mentioned, it's been the issue of contention in a separate matter that the former president is currently, facing in the courts. And the reality is the Correctional Services Department has not actually said, what are the reasons why he's being granted medical parole. They've simply given us the criteria under which he has been considered for medical parole, which is what is prescribed in the Act. That really says very little to South Africans who would be wanting a greater level of transparency.
I completely agree with you, Kathy, on that score. But let's not forget that the content of the medical report, the content of the medical report and the medical condition is strictly guided by the confidentiality between the doctor and the patient. Hence, on the previous occasions, you had the foundation bemoaning the leaking of the information pertaining to the medical record. So we can really debate it till the cows come home. But we are dealing with the former president, and everything has been clothed under the veil of secrecy. And it depends on how you really want to interpret his right to privacy as a person, to say maybe when he's a president, he waives his rights to privacy, but it also affects the doctors that are actually writing his medical certificate, that they can be taken to task if ever there's information that is provided relating to his medical conditions. But what we know is that he has been in and out of hospitals. There were issues pertaining to his health, and we are looking at his advanced age. And I believe that the correctional services have arrived at the correct decision with the Department of Justice to release him on medical parole, even though we don't know the contents of what his condition of health is, which will remain a secret.
So one of the difficulties becomes the fact that we are dealing with a population in this country that is already skeptical about the criminal justice system. And there is a prevailing perception that it is only the poor who suffer sometimes at the hands of justice, of this justice system, even where they could well be deserving of consideration for something such as medical parole. And on the issue of the transparency in terms of what is actually wrong, of course, one immediately thinks about the case in terms of the Shabir Sheikh matter, where the contents in terms of why he was said to have been terminally ill was not really questioned. But it later came out that the doctors who wrote that report, the doctor rather, had not even examined him herself, but rather had received a report from his private doctors.
Yeah, those are the processes that that actually you rate might unfold at a later stage, Kathy. And you are giving a correct example in the Sheikh matter that later on, when there was some digging, it was found that there were procedural things that were actually done. But I hope that this will not be the case when we are dealing with the case of the former president, given the nature of his age and his condition, and of him going in and going out of the hospital. But unfortunately, like we are saying, we are not privy to the information of why he was actually released. They said, based on his conditions, based on his medical conditions, they are duty bound to actually release him. And like I'm saying, it is only based on the culture of human rights and the constitution that we have in South Africa to say you have to respect the right of privacy of an individual, and including himself as the former president, he has that right which you cannot unfortunately waive. And we are finding ourselves in this kind of situation. Perhaps later on, as you have actually said, we will get the details of what was the contents of the medical condition.
Sure. Advocate Ntambeleni, before I let you go, what impact does this have on the other matter that is before the court, that the former president is also currently a key suspect of?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It will depend on the condition. And the previous time is that he was being assessed by independent doctors to be able to determine whether he is fit to stand trial. So the million-dollar question there, Kathy, is whether the sicknesses incapacitate him not to be able to stand trial. And Kathy, I can tell you, free of charge now, that even if he can stand trial, and be found guilty in the other matters that he's facing, the chances of him facing a custodial sentence are very slim now, because already he's being released on parole based on medical conditions. So you can never imprison him. So a non-custodial sentence will be a sentence that can be meted out if ever any of his trials proceeds.
So a significant decision then by the Correctional Services Department that could well have overreaching decisions for any of the cases that former President Jacob Zuma is facing. Particularly, this is with relation to the arms deal matter that is currently before the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Advocate Romeo Ntambeleni, let me thank you so much for your time, for coming onto the show tonight.